Good morning. I want to call to order the Subcommittee on Readiness of the House Armed Services Committee. I want to welcome everybody this morning. Thank our witnesses for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize a number of our great young airmen that are here from Langley Air Force Base. I want to welcome you here to Washington. We appreciate all the Langley Air Force Association does. We've got a great working relationship there, as well as the Langley Civic Association. Taylor, thanks so much for your leadership there. We appreciate that. And I know that I have to compete with Miss Bordallo. So, Miss Bordallo, is there anybody here from Anderson Air Force Base?
Is there?
Is there? We have a little competition going. Wherever we go, there's always somebody there from Guam. So I want to make sure that we had the opportunity to recognize them here this morning. But yes.
Would you kindly stand up, please?
Here, I knew it. I knew it. Fantastic. There you go. She always does. Well, good morning. I want to thank all of you for being here for our readiness hearing on the Department of Air Force 2017 budget request and readiness posture. This is the first of 4 hearings on the service's budget request and readiness postures, and in December and January, the services testified on increased readiness risks due to reduced installation investments. And today, I look forward to hearing how the Air Force budget request enables a readiness recovery plan and where we continue to take risk. I'd like to welcome all of our members and distinguished panel of Air Force experts. This morning we have with us General David Goldfine, U.S. Air Force Vice Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General John Raymond, U.S. Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff Operations, Lieutenant General John Cooper, U.S. Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, Engineering, and Force Protection. Thank you all for testifying today, and we look forward to your thoughts and insights on these important issues. And the purpose of this hearing is for the committee to receive clarification on Air Force choices for its budget requests, to address funding priorities and mitigation strategies, and to gather more detail on the current and future impacts of these decisions on operations and training. Once again, I want to thank our witnesses for participating in our hearing this morning, and I look forward to discussing these important topics. And now I'd like to turn to our ranking member, Madeleine Bordallo, for any remarks that she may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And first, I would like to thank the witnesses, General Goldfein, nice to see you again, General Raymond and General Cooper, and of course, all the airmen that are here, and committee people, good morning. I have no doubt that your testimony before our subcommittee this morning will prove insightful, and I thank all of you for your service to our nation. The Air Force has been engaged in constant combat operations overseas for a quarter of a century while conducting global transport and mobile operations, and we do know that this has taken a toll on both our airmen and their equipment. You are accomplishing this feat today with a force that has considerably fewer personnel and aircraft than it did 25 years ago. Our forces continue to be deployed throughout the world, countering threats ranging from terrorist organizations to near-peer adversaries. The requirements placed upon the Air Force and our military as a whole can never be understated. Because of unreliable and unpredictable funding resulting from sequestration and numerous continuing resolutions over the past several years, you've had to maintain a delicate balance between readiness and modernization. At times, this balance has cost readiness, and the further we get behind this curve, the harder it will be for our force to recover to full-spectrum readiness. Through our discussion today, I hope that we can gain a better understanding of the Air Force's plan to maintain readiness through personnel, training, and infrastructure improvement. So again, thank you all for your service, and I look forward to your hearing. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go now to General Goldfine. I understand that you'll be providing the statement for the panel. I just want to remind our panel members, too, that all of your statements will be entered into the record, so we will have that. And if you'd like to add anything, we can do that through the questioning period. So, General Goldfine.
Thank you, Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Bordallo, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. On behalf of our Air Force Secretary and Chief of Staff, it's an honor to be with you today and a privilege to sit beside these 2 great airmen and in front of these incredible airmen. Together, we're honored to represent the 660,000 total force airmen serving today, and we request that our written statement be placed in the record. A little over 25 years ago, Then Captain Dave Goldfein piloted an F-16 fighter on my first sortie in the opening hours of Operation Desert Storm. During the 100-hour ground war that followed the air campaign, the Air Force, along with our fellow joint and coalition partners, provided the same blanket of air power that had shielded U.S. forces since April of 1953, the last time an American service member was killed by enemy aircraft. In addition to providing top cover, America's airmen defended the base perimeter, refueled and maintained aircraft, controlled air traffic, managed supply lines, tended to our wounded, airdropped humanitarian aid, and supported the joint team with global vigilance, reach, and power. To many Americans, and to others across the globe, Operation Desert Storm set the standard for American air power, and it's what they remember. In the quarter century since Desert Storm, your Air Force has remained engaged in combat operations without respite. As we sit here today, airmen are standing watch over our nuclear enterprise, and they are conducting the lion's share of strike, air refueling, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance sorties over Iraq and Syria. However, 25 years of continuous combat operations, coupled with budget instability and lower than planned top lines, have made the Air Force one of the smallest, oldest, and least ready forces in its history. To put our relative size, age, and readiness in perspective, in 1991, we deployed 33 of our 134 combat-coded active Guard and Reserve fighter squadrons in support of Operation Desert Storm. We were 946,000 airmen strong. The average age of our aircraft was 17 years, and 80% of the fighter force was ready for full-spectrum conflict. In contrast, today we have just 55 total force fighter squadrons and approximately 660,000 total force airmen. The average age of our aircraft is 27 years, and less than 50% of our combat air force is ready for full-spectrum conflict. Couple this significant readiness reduction with the rising China, Russian aggression in Eastern Europe and Syria, Iranian malign influence in the Middle East, North Korean nuclear and space ambitions, and our ongoing fight to degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL, and you have an Air Force that is too small, too old, and less ready for what the nation requires. Simply put, if we were to remain the most lethal and effective air, space, and cyberspace force on the planet, we must take steps to rebuild our readiness now. In order to accomplish this goal, the fiscal year 2017 budget aims to build, train, and equip an Air Force capable of responding to today's and tomorrow's threats. It balances capability, capacity, and readiness in support of our 5 core missions: air and space superiority, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, rapid global mobility, global strike, and command and control. Our number one priority is our nuclear mission, and our budget reflects this importance, including investments in ICBMs, command, control, and communications, as well as B-2 and B-52 bomber modifications. The F-35, KC-46, and LRS-B will change the calculus of any potential adversary and will be critical to success in any future high-end fight. For an Air Force, failing to push the technological edge equals failure. And when the Air Force fails, the joint team fails. Our fiscal year 17 budget request includes the funding required to recover the manpower needed to ensure the health of our nuclear forces, aircraft maintenance teams, battlefield airmen, and other critically undermanned and overtasked career fields. This budget marks the return of a committed investment to global vigilance, global reach, and global power for America. A return to BCA-level funding in fiscal year 2018 will further decimate our readiness and modernization and will place the nation at unacceptable risk. Mr. Chairman, decisive air, space, and cyberspace power and the ability to command and control these forces have become the oxygen the joint force breathes and are fundamental to American security and joint operations. The fiscal year 2017 President's budget and the flexibility to execute it as we have recommended is an investment in the Air Force our nation needs. America expects it, combatant commanders require it, and with your support, our airmen will deliver it. On behalf of our Secretary, our Chief of Staff, and the 660,000 active Guard and Reserve Airmen who give our service life. Thank you for your tireless support, and we look forward to your questions.
General Goldfein, thank you so much. Thanks for your testimony, and thanks for your commitment as well as all the other airmen in getting our Air Force back to where it needs to be. I want to ask, in that context, where we are in restoring readiness. We know that the rebuilding point for readiness is set for the Air Force essentially at FY 2020. So if you can give us some perspective on staying on that glide path, based on what the budget request is this year, in the resetting, beginning as a benchmark in 2020, how far are we going to be able to go in restoring Air Force readiness, and give us some ideas of the time frames? And along the way, obviously, you're going to have to make some tough decisions about risk. Tell us what core functions you will have to make some tough decisions about where risk will be placed in this readiness recovery effort.
Thank you, sir. So we have stated previously that our readiness recovery plan is dependent on a couple of key variables. The most important is a reduction in deploy to dwell time, which actually allows us to have the time to do the training that we need for high-end conflict. That's something, quite frankly, that we really can't control given the global situation. And while we're incredibly proud of the fact that air power is a requirement in all of the contingencies that we face, both current and potentially in the future, it has resulted in a demand signal that has reduced our ability to do the high-end training we need. So while we testified previously that we believed that we would be able to achieve full spectrum readiness on a given date, it's actually a rolling time frame. And as our Chief and Secretary have testified, it's about an 8 to 10 year time frame when we actually get the conditions set to be able to rebuild that readiness. So we can, in the last time we testified and we said 2025 was about what we were targeting, that was based on some assumptions that haven't panned out.
Right.
And some of those assumptions were that we wouldn't be increasing our activity in the Pacific, that we wouldn't be increasing our activity in Europe, and that we wouldn't be increasing the activity that we are now seeing in Iraq and Syria. So as long as that activity continues and that demand signal is there, what you'll see from us is a continual rolling 8 to 10 year cycle to get to full spectrum readiness. Our prediction right now is that for the next 2 to 3 years, we'll probably just be able to hold our own in terms of our current state of readiness. And as the Chief and Secretary have testified, where we currently sit and where I mentioned in my opening statement is we're approximately 50% ready across the total force for full spectrum conflict.
Does your 2017 budget request, does that reflect maintaining the necessary effort in core functions going forward? And secondly, does 2017 budget, does that help you in setting the conditions for restoring readiness? And if not, where are the shortfalls or the things that we need to consider as we develop the policy to lay the framework for appropriations?
Thank you, sir. So when we submitted this budget, we worked to get the best balance we could, given the top line we received, between capability, capacity, and readiness. And so what you'll see in the readiness accounts is that we actually funded our readiness accounts to the capacity that we can generate. Okay. And so that, with the addition of OCO funding on top, we're actually able to fly to the capacity that we can generate. You had asked before about the core functions, or about where we're taking the greatest risk. The two core functions of our 5, where I believe we have the greatest risk, are in air and space superiority and global strike. And the reason for that is where we have to train to the high-end fight against a peer adversary, and that's where we're just not getting the downtime to be able to train to that level. So when we talk about the combat air forces and we talk about gaining and maintaining air superiority, that requires training at a very high level against sophisticated adversaries and their capabilities, and that's where we're struggling to be able to find the time to do that.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, General Goldfein. I'm going to go now to Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. General, the Air Force is facing a modernization bubble with several major projects competing for budget space. as evidenced by the F-35 procurement decrease this year and over the coming years. What is the one thing that Congress can do to improve Air Force readiness while addressing the modernization changes?
Yes, ma'am. So first, let me tell you that you'll hear a consistent answer from me in terms of what Congress can do, and that is repeal BCA. Because when we go back and take a look at what happened to your United States Air Force in 2013 when we were sequestered, it devastated our readiness, and quite frankly, we're still recovering. So now when I take a look at the budget that we've submitted, we did have to make some strategic trades between modernization and readiness. And like I said, first of all, we funded to our capacity, our current capacity in the readiness accounts. But to do that, we had to take some risk in modernization that we did not want to do. Deferring F-35 procurement, deferring C-130 procurement, pushing to the right, modernization of our fourth generation aircraft, all required for that high-end fight, are all risk trades that we had to make to be able to keep our readiness accounts at capacity.
Thank you. Another question I have, the Air Force has been a leader in advocating the total force concept, integrating the active and the reserve components. General, what opportunities do you see in this and future years for leveraging the cost-saving nature of the National Guard to contribute to increased readiness, and where can Congress play a role in facilitating these engagements?
Thanks, ma'am, for the opportunity to showcase our Guard and Reserve. We are one force, one Air Force, and all three components are actively participating. As the former Air Component Commander for Central Command, I traveled around the region, as you might imagine, and it never ceased to amaze me when I would go up in the cockpit of a C-17, and one of the questions I would ask is, okay, which one of you is active, which one of you is Guard, and which one is Reserve? And I'd often have all three in the same cockpit performing that mission. That just gives you one vignette of just how closely integrated we are across the force. So where we continue to look for opportunity is where we can leverage very often the higher experience level and the stability in the Guard force and our Reserve force as we look to continue to associate in ways that can bring more and more capability to the fight. The Secretary, in her testimony previously this week, made a comment that one of the activities we're looking at is how do we take the large number of active duty service codes that are out there and start combining them to make it easier for folks to come into the Guard Active Reserve and be able to transition between those components so that we can actually leverage the most that we can from the individual components. And I'll just give you one quick vignette. So our Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force came back from a visit to Lewis McChord up in Washington. And he noticed a young senior airman driving to work in a Tesla. And so he pulled the airman over aside and said, okay, talk to me. How's this? And he said, well, sir, I'm actually in the Air National Guard, but when I'm not in the Air National Guard, I'm the Director of Security for a Fortune 500 Silicon Valley tech company. But I also want to serve. And so when I'm not working security for this particular company, I'm a senior airman and I'm doing cyber business for the United States Air Force. We want to make that easier. And so anything that Congress can do to help us to be able to make that continuum easier would be extremely helpful, and that's what we want to leverage.
Thank you very much. And I have one final question for you, General. And I will also say that we as members of Congress, whenever we travel on our Codels, when it's a mil-air operation, the Guard is there for us and doing a great job. The budget request indicates that the Air Force will continue to take risk in facility sustainment, restoration, and modernization. What impacts will reduced FSRM spending have on our airmen's day-to-day quality of life and activities? General Cooper?
Congresswoman Borda, I'd like to field that. The simple truth is there's not enough money to go around. So we did, this budget request does take risk in our installations. That's really where we take the risk at the expense of modernization and readiness. So what you'll see as you dive into the budget is that we've constructed our installations around military construction and around FSRM facility sustainment, restoration, and modernization. Based on the pause in 13, we have to get at construction. So we put more money into our military construction, and we put less money into our restoration modernization. We kept the same amount, roughly the same amount in sustainment because we got to keep the buildings moving. That does push us into a strategy of worst first. We have a backlog of like $12 billion in facility restoration modernization projects. So we're addressing the worst first. The worst first focuses around the mission. So unfortunately, quality of life is competing against mission requirements, and we are opting for our mission requirements. So internally, we are working processes on those core services to make sure our airmen can get the best we can give them. Things like child development centers, things like gymnasiums and fitness centers, and dining facilities. We're using transformational efforts to make sure that we can expand hours, provide those services so that airmen can conduct the mission. But at the funding level we're at, we have to focus on modernization and readiness.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for your candid answers to our questions. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bordalio. We'll now go to Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here and for your service. And I just wonder, is that plane still flying? What were you flying 25 years ago, and is that one still in the air?
I've been told it's now being used for an unmanned drone. I'm hoping not.
But it probably still is in the air. That's something most people don't recognize, is that while we had that many decades edge 25 years ago, the fact that we haven't recapitalized has given our adversaries an opportunity to maybe not catch us, but get a lot closer to us. I want to talk to you about the JStars, which is an ISR platform that flies out of Warner Robins. Obviously, there's some money in the budget this year for it. There was more money last year for it. I'm concerned about the reduction in that. But the recapitalization of the JStars fleet has continued to push a year here, a year there. And when I look at the charts that show what's going to happen with our current planes that are flying, when they go in for depot maintenance, we're going to end up with a capability gap that's going to force us to either keep very, very old planes, much older than the ones that you were flying 25 years ago in the air, or not be able to provide that the moving target indicator and the battle management platform to the forces that need it on the ground. The other aspect that I see is that the new system would save a tremendous amount of money on an annual basis. It's a new plane, much more efficient, can gather more data at one time, and I just don't understand why a program that uses existing mature technology that is relatively inexpensive compared to the other platforms that we talk about with regard to the recapitalization has taken so long to deliver. And my question is, what are the plans for the capability gap that's going to exist when the current planes, which are many decades old, go in for depot maintenance, if the new planes are not ready to go? And what plans would you have for accelerating the timeline to make sure that we don't have those capability gaps?
Thanks, sir. So when we went, as we have been in discussions about JStars, part of the discussion has been, do we shift to an unmanned versus a manned large aircraft manned platform? We went out to the combatant commanders. The Chief Staff of the Air Force went out to every combatant commander to revalidate individually the requirement for airborne battle management as a critical component of their war plans. And that was validated across all of the combatant commanders. That's important because very often when we talk JStars, we start talking about the sensor, but I would argue that the most important thing that JStars brings is airborne battle management. As the Air Component Commander for Central Command, I will tell you that I used that platform in a number of ways, in addition to what's traditionally considered, airborne battle management of the air-to-ground fight. I used it in the maritime domain, covering the Straits of Hormuz. So first and foremost, we've validated that airborne battle management is a critical requirement for the combatant commanders, and we need to move out on that. Now the challenge becomes a technology discussion, which is at what point do we transition, and can we transition this to an unmanned platform of the future versus a manned platform? And the reality is the technology that we would need to put on an unmanned platform doesn't currently exist to get the same capability that we provide to combatant commanders today. It's just not miniaturized enough. It just can't give the same level of fidelity of the ground moving target indicator that the JStars does today. So the Air Force's position for two reasons. One, we don't have the technology to put on a manned platform, and two, airborne battle management is the critical requirement. We need to be pushed forward with a manned airborne platform. We have the funding in this budget to do that. But that dialogue has slowed us down. And then I'll turn to General Cooper to talk about covering the gap in the middle.
Yes, sir. I mean, the JStars got, it's an old airplane, 47 years old, and we are having structural issues. You know, as you know, 50% of the airplanes are in depot, and the depot takes longer to keep them going. But that's emblematic of really our larger fleets, right? Is we have to recapitalize our fleets. We have a number of fleets that are almost as old as JStars, and we just have to keep on recapitalizing our fleets.
Well, thank you for that. The JStars fleet is a relatively small fleet, though, and the total cost of recapitalization is significantly less than it is for most of these other fleets. And it seems to me that if we could push forward with an aggressive rapid acquisition process, that we could get newer planes, better technology, that are going to save us money on an annual basis. And instead of spending so much money on depot maintenance for planes that we know we're going to pull out as soon as we have the new platform, why not push this thing up? I mean, we're talking about, we talk multi-billions for a lot of platforms, hundreds of billions, and this is not one that costs anywhere close to what most of the platforms cost. And as you said, it can't be done with any other platform, the battle management aspect of it. So thank you for your service. And
Thank you, Mr. Scott. We'll now go to Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel for being here this morning. General, last year's NDAA, we came up with a pretty good arrangement for the C-130 modernization with the new AMP-1 approach that hopefully is going to short-circuit some of the problems that existed before. On page 14 of your testimony, you mentioned the C-130 modernization. I was wondering if you could just sort of talk about what's in the budget. I mean, it seems like a relatively small number for 2017, and 2020, as you know, is coming up fast for the global navigation requirements. So I was wondering if you could elaborate.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So we've broken up the AMP program into, as you know, two increments. So increment one, which actually makes the C-130 capable of flying in all the international airspace and meets FAA requirements. Previous budget, we actually had that completing in 2022. We were able to, in this budget, actually accelerate that to 2020, which allows us to actually be in line with the expectation for the FAA on being AMP-1 compliant by the time frame they've given us. So that's the first. We've also been able to fully fund increment 2, which actually does the physical upgrades to the C-130, and that will now complete in 2028. So we feel pretty good about the AMP program right now. We've actually, Chief of Staff has led an effort through our total force to talk to all of the states that have C-130s. All of the adjutant generals are part of this plan. When we work through the C-130 issues, we actually have that dialogue with them, so they're part of the process. So right now, going into this budget, we feel pretty good about the program.
And again, I'm sure, you know, later in the process, we're going to have more conversations about this with you and your team. It's just, so is there any space or, you know, possibility that Congress can help in terms of accelerating it more, or you know, flexibility in the 2017 budget to help, again, push this along?
So we'll take that one to see if there's any kind of help we would require from Congress. Right now, we feel like the program is pretty well funded for what industry can support. I will tell you where we could use your help, though, and that is, you know, we had to take some decisions, make some decisions to delay critical modernization to be able to pay readiness and get the balance in this budget. One of the decisions we made was to defer some C-130J procurement. And so any help we could get to bring those back would be very much appreciated.
Thank you very much, General. And again, to all the witnesses for your service, I yield back.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. We'll now go to Mr. Lubiando.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the panel, and thank you for your service. For General Goldfein. General, in procurement line 22 of the aircraft procurement account for F-16 AESA radars, the Air Force requests and states an expedited delivery schedule. It's imperative to operationally field the AESA radar in support of Homeland Defense against evolving threats. Can you please update the subcommittee on how the research, design, test, and evaluation as appropriated in last year's omnibus is progressing? What phase are you currently in, and how will this be completed, and when do you foresee an award coming?
Thanks, sir. As you know, the department originally pursued a joint urgent operational need, a JUON, from the supported combatant commander, the NORTHCOM commander in this case, to be able to procure the AESA radars for those F-16s that we use to do defense of the national capital region. What a JUON does for us is it allows us to actually go sole source, which speeds up the acquisition process. That JUON was not supported, so therefore we are now in a competition for those radios or those radars. The Air Force fully funded 24 of those sets to be able to take care of those aircraft that are part of the NCR. But now what we'll need to do and what we were pursuing is an acquisition strategy that allows competition for those 24, and the money's been laid in for that. The remainder of the fleet will also be able to go into a full and open competition so that we can continue to modernize the remainder of the F-16 fleet with AESA radars. But we do have a strategy to get at the 24, although we're not able to go sole source this time.
So you're attempting to expedite, or?
Attempting to expedite, but we have to follow the acquisition rules for a competition. Okay. But the money has been laid in for those 24.
Okay. I recently received word that the Ops 5 and 6 for the F-35 Air National Guard basing decision criteria has been pushed back to later in the spring of 2016. Can you update the subcommittee on how that is progressing?
Yes, sir. So as you know, we build our basing process so that we can be fully open and transparent with all of Congress to ensure that not only do you see the criteria, but that you see how each base scores out in that criteria. So what we're looking at right now with the F-35 Ops 5 and 6 is what criteria now do we need to make sure that we have ready to go. As soon as that criteria is ready, we will then put that out, and then we'll start the process that goes through not only setting the criteria, but then actually then scoring a certain number of bases against that criteria, sharing with Congress how that scoring occurred, and then making the final decision that the Secretary makes in terms of what that basing will be.
Do you have any idea of timeline on that, of when we're going to get to see any of that?
Let me see if we have all that. Do you have any timing? Sir, can we take that one and we'll get it back to you?
Sure. I obviously have a great interest in that. I'd like to think that I represent the, if not one of the premier Homeland Security bases in the country, because of our strategic location to New York and to Washington. And we think fair, objective, and transparent, we'd score really well in that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And we'll try to get that answer to you, I think, even before this hearing ends, if we can.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lobiondo. We'll now go to Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I wanted to expand on training a little bit in two respects. One is, I'd like you to explain why it is that a delay in the annual budget or diminishment in the annual budget for training lasts beyond the year. I think people don't often understand that there's a permanent effect to underfunding training year to year. And also wanted you to address sort of your sense of what any additional challenges for the training budget are posed by the addition of new airframes like the F-35.
Thanks, sir. So first on the delay and the lag effect that goes into training. So the way we do our flying hour program is we budget in 2-year cycles, as you know, sir. And so we project in the future how much we think we're going to fly in contingency flying. And given the capacity of any weapon system, I'll take the F-16 Block 50 as an example. It's designed for suppression of enemy air defenses, so a very high-end fight-centered, focused community. So we look at all of the capabilities in that way in that weapon system to produce flying hours, and that's a fixed capacity. And then we project how much of that we think in that weapon system will be flown downrange, and that becomes part of what we call the OCO. And so you can't go up because that's the fixed capacity of the weapon system. So the only thing that can happen with that is that what you project doesn't pan out and the assumptions change. And what we found year after year is that we actually fly more downrange activity than we have left for home station training. So what that means in the Block 50 F-16, for instance, is that aircrew that are supposedly or that are trained and designed to do high-end peer-to-peer conflict in a contested environment are actually focusing more and more of their training on the lower-end close air support, violence extremist fight. So they lose their skills over time, and you can't build those back immediately because you've got to build them back so that they can be that community. They have to be wingmen, they have to be flight leads, they have to be instructors, they have to be, they have to be certified for all of those. The less amount you have to train to that high-end fight, the less readiness that you have. So it actually takes you more and more time to actually build that back. When it comes to bringing the F-35 and other weapon systems, the challenge for us, and both the challenge and the asymmetric opportunity, is that we approach joint warfare from a networked perspective. And the vignette I would share with you is, when I flew the F-117 as the last pilot, and when I took off and flew the F-117, first generation low observable, it was a very closed system approach to using LO. I mean, I actually had a switch that would turn everything off. All of the sensors would stow, and I would, lower my seat and go to work. In the F-35, when you power up the aircraft, it starts doing machine-to-machine collaboration and discussion on the initial power-up, and it starts comparing amongst in the network, and it's talking to air, space, cyber. It's doing the full spectrum look, and it's doing a human-machine collaboration that actually places symbology on the visor of that aircraft. And so it's a very networked approach. So when we bring the F-35, the F-22 on, it's about the networked approach to warfare, and that makes it its own training challenge because we've got to be able to simulate that entire network when we go to training as opposed to a single aircraft going out and training on a range.
It just sort of, I know quantitatively, just how short are we, given that we've been lagging a little bit already?
So as I testified earlier, we're at 50% or less in overall full spectrum readiness across the Air Force. And that vignette I share with you in terms of the fact that we're not training at this level, that's exactly what that means. I mean, that we're not able to train to the suppression of enemy air defenses mission because we are using that weapon so much in the fight against ISIL. So at 50% readiness, the challenge is, if you look at what our Secretary of Defense has laid out as the major strategic challenges that we face, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and a condition of violent extremism that we will likely have to deal with for the next decade. That covers the spectrum of the potential conflict that we may face. So if we as an Air Force are 50% ready, what we're saying is we're 50% ready against the higher end threats.
Right. And General, I just want you to know that's something that's been on my mind since I've been on this subcommittee. And it's something that's not easily observed, and so I wanted to take a little time to draw it out. I appreciate the emphasis on it, and hope we can be responsive. Thank you again for your testimony and your service. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. We'll now go to Mr. Bishop.
Thank you. General, I appreciate the opportunity of being here. Mr. Whitman, I appreciate you having a hearing at 8 a.m. in the morning. I realize you think there are no other issues that conflict with that. There is one. It's called my mattress. I wish you'd get one that's comfortable for you so we wouldn't be doing this. And General, can I also just, before I ask a question, just say one thing. Your complaints about the BCA are spot on accurate, but it's too narrow. there were 4 other cuts in addition to that, as well as the 25 years of constant combat flights you had to do. You add all those things together. So when you have the criticisms, don't just narrow it to that one aspect. There are other things that have screwed you up in addition to that. It's much, much broader than that. Can I ask you a question, though? You did mention the written testimony about Hill, which is important to me for obvious reasons. I do have some concern over the transition that's going forward, especially as we look in what's going in the future. Is there any concern, because the 388th is a combined unit, is there any concern you have with the reserve unit there? Are they going to be tasked more or less in the future?
Thank you, Congressman Bishop. Thanks for the question. The reserve component at Hill, like all of our reserve components, are critical to our force and great partners. We do have a transition plan. Those F-16s will be transitioning in the 18 timeframe, and what we've done to fund that transition is to put some funding in to make sure that those aircraft can be flown while we're waiting for the transition.
But the maintainers is still going to be a problem that has to be dealt with. General?
I can field that, Congressman Bishop. Yes, F-30 maintainers are a problem in our Air Force. We have taken great steps to make sure that we're going to transition well to IOC and for F-35, but I am concerned on any F-35 bed downs after IOC. We're 4,000 maintainers short in our Air Force. We're focusing on Hill right now to make sure that we can get the maintainers for IOC. So right now at Hill specific, we've moved, as you know, the 4th Fighter Squadron came back recently. We moved those maintainers over to begin training for F-35, and we have 6 airplanes there. I'll be out there next week making sure we get IOC right. And then the reserves are taking care of the F-16s. When the 421st Squadron comes back, the same will occur. Those maintainers will move over to F-35, and then the reserves will manage the F-16s.
But that still seems to indicate there's going to be a greater emphasis put on the reserves taking more capacity.
Yes, the reserves will. We're going to let the reserves work on use those aircraft at Hill Air Force Base until transitions in the following years.
Can I transition just slightly and see if you can do this? Because I do have a concern about hiring practices. I wonder if the Air Force is going into that. I mean, some of them are taking up to 160 days just to hire people. Is the Air Force looking at trying to devolve some of that authority? Because once again, I think OPM's goal is like 80 days, which seems to be an outrageous goal. And if indeed you cannot hire those people, I understand you have to augment them with contractors, which may, on the work lines, which may not necessarily be a cheaper way of doing it. So is the Air Force moving in something to try and deal with civilian hiring practices?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, our Secretary of the Air Force is leading that effort herself. She has tasked our A1, our Director of Personnel, to look at all of our policies across the Air Force relative to civilian personnel to see how we can speed up the process of hiring when we need to hire, especially for critical skill sets. She is also having us take a look at the continuum of service between the 3 components and allowing civilians to be able to come into the Air Force, especially where we need critical skills. The challenge we have, Congressman, as you know, is that most of the rules associated with civilian actually don't reside within the service. Most of those are above the service. So while we're looking at everything we can and wire brushing all of our individual policies, it's really above us, and that's where we could probably use your help.
Thank you. Well, we'll try and do that as best we can to help out. I appreciate your comments about 4th generation modifications have been delayed. You were very clear on how the readiness capacity or capabilities are being lost. I also have that's not even a question, I'm just saying that once again, I also have concern of how it's affecting contracts, depot workloads, everything else. I've only got 20 seconds, so you don't need to respond to that. But thank you for your presence here. And in an hour, I think I'll be awake so I can understand what you actually said.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. We'll make sure that when we have an opportunity, we convene at a later time.
And then we'll talk Indian bills after
That's
that.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will. We'll now go to Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask General about the nuclear cruise missile part of this budget. And I'll tell you my limited understanding and some of my concerns, which should take no more than a minute, and then offer you the remainder to answer. My understanding is that this is a $30 billion price tag for a weapon that will be carried on the aging B-52 platform. I want to know what would happen should we not pursue this strategy? What is the risk to the United States? And two, what are your thoughts on the British decision a few years back not to pursue this as a strategy because of their concern that it would produce miscalculation and unintended consequences? And it kind of departs from traditional nuclear deterrence, where each side has a good understanding of the other's capabilities and their conditions for using them. And so if you'd take the remaining 4 minutes to answer those concerns and tell us what would happen if we didn't do this and where we could apply those $30 billion if we didn't.
Thanks, sir. Just to talk about just the funding part of it right now, just for so the long-range standoff weapon that will replace our air-launched cruise missile is currently scheduled to be integrated not only on the B-52 but also on the B-2. So for us, the way we look at this is it has to do with 21st century strategic deterrence and what the nuclear aspect of that is. And we as an Air Force, we like to joke that we're responsible for 3 of the 4 legs, because if you add nuclear command and control, which we're responsible for, it's actually almost a leg in and of itself to ensure that we have assured communications. So for us, it's about how do we ensure that we have a reliable, assured, secure nuclear deterrent to be able to hold targets at risk so that we can show that we have that capacity and capability. And so there's a number of ways you do that. You do that through the bomber force. You do that through of course, the ground-based force, our Minuteman III, then transitioning to the GBSD. And we also do that with the Navy with our submarine force. And so for us, when you take a look at the long-range standoff missile, it's about being able to have the right standoff to be able to actually go in to be able to service targets that the commander-in-chief may ask us to service. And so when we look at it, we need to have both that capability, which is standoff, plus we need to have gravity capability, plus we need to have penetrating capability with gravity, which is why we're putting money into the B-61 as well. And we have to modernize the nuclear missile fields. And so that's why you see an increase of $4.3 billion in this budget to be able to modernize the nuclear. So what we would tell you is that we believe that's a critical component of the 3 legs of the triad. In terms of, risk that we would have in terms of employment, modernization of a particular weapon system does not actually indicate that you would be more susceptible to use. That's purely a commander-in-chief decision. So we would say, as the employers of the nuclear enterprise, that we don't think it increases risk. So one of the areas that we're going to need help from Congress on is that if you take a look at the nuclear enterprise, most of it was built in the 40s and 50s, and it's aging significantly. And we have some bills that are going to come due after this FIDEP in the 2022 timeframe that are significant. So we were working within the department to look at all aspects of the nuclear enterprise to ensure that we were putting the best dollar forward to ensure that we have a safe, secure, reliable nuclear deterrent for the 21st century that has all 3 legs plus the command and control intact.
So you do not share the British concern or the concern of former Defense Secretary Perry about the risk of miscalculation or unintended consequences. You think this is the wisest use of that $30 billion?
Yes, sir, I do.
And if, for whatever reason, Congress were not to support that request, where would that, and still allow for that $30 billion to be used within the Air Force, where would that money go?
Sir, to be honest with you, what we would do is we would take a look first at our stewardship of the nuclear enterprise. And so the first place we would look is where do we need to place that within the nuclear enterprise as our #1 priority for our service. After that, we would look at it like we look at everything else, which is it would look at a planning choice, and we would look at the trades that we have to make between capability, capacity, and readiness. But I can assure you the first place we would look would be within the nuclear enterprise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. We'll now go to Mr. Gibson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the panelists. Thank you for your service and your sacrifices and those of your family. My question has to do with joint interoperability, training, and readiness, and specifically with regard to the budget. If you could lay out where the commitments are in terms of joint forcible entry exercise, how many commitments, how many rotations do you see this budget year? And then also commitments to the National Training Center and the scope of that, and any other modeling and simulation for the year, if you can lay out where the budget is.
Thanks, sir. So, 15 years of continuous combat has actually produced the most joint force in our history, and I can say that also personally, having been the Combined Forces Air Component Commander deployed for 2 of those years. So what we've found is that our forces, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, who are downrange are not only training but executing jointly every day. And then when we come back at all of our major training venues, if you go out and take a look at Red Flag at Nellis, Green Flag at Nellis, Cyber Flag, NTC rotations, Air Warrior rotations, you will have a joint element of every one of our exercises, and the service chiefs and the threes, the directors of operation, work that hard every day. We are very proud of the fact that when it comes to training of the United States Army and their joint forcible entry capability, when it comes to especially airborne, that we provide the lift that they require to do that mission. And so working with General Abrams in Forces Command and working with not only our Army but also our Marine Corps and Special Forces, what we ensure is that we understand the requirement for the number of jumps that we have to support. And then we look across our enterprise of the global mobility to ensure that we have the C-17s and the C-130s and the H-60s that are required to be able to support those jumps.
Appreciate that. And as you know, and I thank you so much for an incredible career you've had, the whole piece of it comes together with electronic warfare, with fighters, bombers, and command and control. So specifically, the question is, how many joint forcible entry exercises are in the budget for this year?
We have really focused on putting resources to the training effort. And in this program, that budget that was just submitted, we have over $398 million going to CAF readiness training, which are those exercises that you talked about. We've invested over $235 million into our training ranges to make sure that those ranges are high-end capable, 5th generation capable to get the most out of those training events. We've also spent about $345 million on live, virtual, and constructive training, looking at how do you do that better in the simulator to maximize those training events.
So thank you. And it may very well be my failings in not framing the question right, but I'll sort of lay out a few points. Over the years, as we, we're working to sustain the joint piece of this, the forcible entry piece of this, we could have anywhere from 8 and some years 10 joint forcible entry exercises. And last I looked at it, I think we're down to about 4 a year. And understand, the war has played a big role on that in terms of where the resources need to go, understandably. But this is among the reasons why, gentlemen, I would say I'm concerned about the decision the Air Force has taken with regard to the 440th. And the reason is we're all managing risk. Up here, we're managing risk. The Air Force is certainly managing risk. All the joint forces are managing risk. But among the things that the 440th could do is really allow for smaller units in the 18th Airborne Corps to sustain. As was mentioned, you have take justifiably you're proud of the fact that you do help the joint forces maintain their readiness. But it's especially difficult today at the company and battalion level to keep up on the eaches when it comes to their requirement, knowing that the 4 major packages that we have, the joint forcible entry exercises, is important for exercising higher level staffs for integration, but it's getting tougher to, the one-offs. The people go to school and come back, and that was managed by the 440th actually being at Fort Bragg.
Sir, if I could just very quickly, our objective, and we're working this with the commander there, General Townsend. We met with him regularly. Our objective is that when a soldier walks out to the flight line to get on a C-130 for a jump, he doesn't know that the 4040 is gone, because what we have done is we put an aircraft there and he gets the training he needs. That's the objective. And so we do that for a number of bases around the world that do airborne and do training. And so we do that in Vicenza, in Italy. We do that across. So we think we have a good template for that. The Army leadership agrees. And so if we get this right, it'll be transparent to your soldiers.
My time has expired. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. We'll now go to Ms. Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. You spoke a little bit earlier in your comments about the investment and the necessity of increasing cyber capabilities. And I'm wondering if you can talk in a little bit more detail about two things, recruiting and retention. When we look at the talent that exists and the innovation and how quickly evolving this world is in the private sector, what kind of creative efforts are you taking to be able to bring those folks in, to be able to work with us, as well as to retain them once they're there?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. So we're working, quite frankly, very hard with effort that the Secretary of Defense is leading called Force of the Future. And one of the elements of that is permeability and allowing easier access to the ingenuity and innovation that's in the private sector and the public sector to come into the military when we need it, and vice versa, right? Also sharing what talent and expertise and capability we have with the private sector. So we continue to look at those capabilities, and right now as an Air Force, our contribution to the cyber force is 39 teams. Represents about 30%, as you might imagine. It's about right for our contribution. 39 teams. The Cybercom has laid out 3 key mission areas they're responsible for: defend the nation, defend the networks, support the combatant commanders. We have 13 teams that we're building to support each of those requirements in each of those mission areas. So 13 times 3 equals 39, so that's where we get to. Right now, we sit at about 26 teams, and we're on track to complete our build of 39 by 2018. So we feel pretty good about where we are, where we're going. I will tell you that you can never stop looking at managing this talent, because we have got to have the incentives in place for not only them to want to join us out of more than just patriotism, but because we are a good place for them to reside because of how we take care of them and the value of their service. So those total force continuum measures that we're working on are going to be incredibly important.
The other thing I would, if I could add,
sure.
we have done a review of the retention across the cyber force, and we're not seeing retention issues with the cyber force. The retention levels mirror the rest of the Air Force. They're about equal. As General Goldfein mentioned earlier with the vignette of the airman driving the Tesla, I think people join the Air Force for a reason. They want to serve their country, protect their nation, and right now we're not seeing those readiness challenges.
Yeah, that's great. Somewhat connected with that, but really on the overall broader scale is, as you talk about the total force and integrating the Guard and reserves, how are you integrating those elements in your deployment to dwell ratio in a way that's sustainable for the future?
Thank you for the question. We are a completely integrated force. As General Goldfein mentioned earlier, you go look in the cockpit and you won't be able to tell the difference. There'll be Guard, Reserve, and active duty all blended together, and that's that way across our service. When you look at the readiness levels across the service, we mirror each other because we operate together. If you look at the deploy to dwell, the same concerns are there with the total force as it is with the active duty force. We about mirror each other in readiness levels, and we watch that very closely. But we are the most integrated service with our Guard and Reserve, and they're critical partners to us.
What is the deploy to dwell ratio now?
Across the board, on average, it's about 1 to 2.5.
Okay.
Ma'am, could I also offer that at some point you do get to a capacity stop?
Yeah.
So regardless of how integrated we are, we still only have 55 squadrons to do the nation's work.
Right.
And so at that point, you actually can't get any more out of what you've already got. So that's why I go back to the point that we're actually too small, and you're seen as trying to build back up the force size and our capacity to do what we believe the nation needs.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gabbard. General Goldfein, in your testimony, when you spoke about the shortage on maintainers, I'd like to get your perspective in a little more of a drill down as to the nature of that. And you talk about needing to use contract maintainers for your A-10s, F-16s, C-130s in order to get people transferred over to spin up to maintain the F-35. There seems to be another aspect to it, though, when you look at the nature of the shortage, and that is many of the shortages are occurring with your senior NCOs that are indeed your trainers for airmen coming in. Tell me, how do you address that? Because that's a long-term issue. The short-term issue is contract maintainers, but the long-term issue is as you bring new Air Force personnel in, how do you get them to stay in the Air Force so they can become that senior NCO, that's a master maintainer, but also the trainer for the new airmen that are coming in the Air Force? Tell me how you address that, because that wasn't related in your testimony.
Chairman, I'd like to answer that. So we are 4,000 maintainers short across the Air Force, and it's the issue is we're bringing 2 F-35s in a month, and each F-35 requires 20 maintainers. So we add to that deficit every single month as we go forward, and next year it'll be 3 F-35s. So we're addressing it fully on how can we grow our fleet. So what we've done to date is we've balanced as much as we can safely do with our legacy fleets, even with our large airplanes moving to fighters, because it's most acute in the fighting Air Force, in our fighters. So we've moved like crew chiefs from C-130s to F-35. Congress authorized us to transfer 18 A-10s to BAI status, or 36 up to 36 A-10s to BAI status. We used 18 because we needed the capacity for the fighting force as well as the maintainers. We split the difference, moved the maintainers to F-35s. So we've done as best we can there. We've offered numerous retention incentives to our older maintainers, our tech sergeants and our master sergeants, our 7 levels, so they'll stay in and retain that training expertise, and we've seen some growth there. Up to 1,000 maintainers have taken the retention bonus and have stayed in, which is good. But we're digging a continual hole as we go forward because we have the force structure that we're not able to divest, and we're growing F-35s. Internally, since 2013, we underassessed our maintainers. So our new airmen coming in, it was a challenge. We had an $8 billion challenge after sequestration going 14 into 15 on how to close that gap. And the first place that we went to, the easiest place to go to get dollars that quick, that soon, is the personnel account. So unfortunately, we underassessed into maintenance. We're reversing that trend. We did it in 2015 at the expense of other critical AFSCs and career fields in the Air Force. We're doing it in 16, up to 1,000 in FY16, at the expense of critical career fields, not maintenance in the Air Force. And this budget asked for a growth of maintainers in the 17 budget, and part of an overall growth for the Air Force. So a large part of that is maintenance. The initiative we just started was looking at to contract maintenance in areas across the Air Force where they're not combat coded units, they're mostly training units. They don't have a deployment requirement, and we feel that we can contract, if the market's right, we can contract in those locations, take those maintainers and move them to F-35. But that's a challenge. That's just a short-term challenge, and we need to continue to grow. And really, that only gets us about 2 years, and we'll have the same problem in 2 years.
Yeah, it just seems like a cascading effect, especially across the MOSs for your maintainers and at every level of experience there. So
it is. We're challenged. We are challenged with especially in our fighter fleets. We have 4 or 6 career fields that are below 1 to 2 dwell, meaning they're slightly at home, slightly longer than they're deployed today in our legacy fleets.
I would just add that when we look at readiness and the impact of that, we have critical skills availability is a key piece of that readiness. And it's not just the numbers of people, but it's the right level of people, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman. And that's why it takes some time to grow that readiness. We've made that initial investment, and we bring new airmen into the Air Force, but it'll take 5 years or so to grow those to a level where we have the senior leadership that we need to build that readiness back up.
I just want to make sure that we reflect the proper policy so you can continue to grow both the capacity and the capability. It has to be grown on both levels. Let me ask a quick question about a comment that you made in your testimony concerning infrastructure and capacity and excess capacity. As you know, we look at that. There was a requirement from last year's NDAA for each of the service branches to provide a report back to Congress concerning capacity issues, overcapacity, excess inventory, those kinds of things, as well as what we had hearings on earlier, and that is, what are we doing to support the existing critical infrastructure and facility support, which is one of the elements of what we use to generate readiness. One of the concerns I have going forward is to make sure that we don't get too short-sighted, because everything we've done recently has been very short-sighted. What do we do to make it to the next budget year? What do we do to move money around? And I understand the immediate need to try to generate some dollars and the dollars that come out for older facilities. And I think that there's a logical way and a risk way to do that. But my concern is this, is on the other side too, the Air Force with its assets is going to continue to grow. We're going to have new fighter aircraft coming on board, a new long-range strategic bomber, a new tanker fleet, that lift capacity that's there, even a few more C-17s, modernized C-130s. So there's a need for infrastructure to support that. So my concern going forward is saying, well, let's reduce base structure or that infrastructure. We know we need that to generate readiness and to support aircraft as it comes on. I want to make sure that those two curves don't cross each other, and then we come back and say, guess what? Now we have more aircraft than we have facilities necessary to keep the aircraft and maintain them. So in my idea, how do you find the right balance in saying we need a BRAC in light of saying we've got to be building more aircraft?
Sir, thanks. I'll start, and then I'm going to turn over to General Cooper to just give you a little bit more detail on where we are with our infrastructure. A couple key points, sir. First, it will be no surprise to you that as airmen, we project air power from our bases. So they're actually part of our fighting platform. So when we actually talk about infrastructure, we're talking about part of how we fight. So it shouldn't be surprising that we're going to put significant amount of resources against our infrastructure. In this budget, we made a strategic trade and a decision to emphasize combatant commander requirements and new mission bed down, KC-46, F-35, because as you stated, as you bring on new weapon systems, there are unique capabilities that you have to build to be able to bed those down. So you'll see those two priorities. And as we testified previously, you've also seen that we've taken risk in our facilities restoration modernization accounts to do that. So as I transition to General Cooper, what I'll tell you is that right now we have about 30%, we're about 30% over in terms of the infrastructure versus our capacity. And so right now today, we would tell you that we are keeping a number of facilities on these large bases up and running because we're not going to tear them down, and we don't have the force structure to require us to use them. So we could use at least a reorganization to be able to get more right-sized. But we also look at that through the lens of where we're going to be in the future when we get these new missions on, right? So when you take a look at the tanker trade, as you'll see, we'll actually build up to about 479 tankers before we actually start coming back down and sort of keep it balanced. So we think that 30% over capacity that we have now will actually continue to exist as we make the trades of the future. So let me turn it over to General Cooper.
Thank you, General. Too much, too old, too expensive. So I'm on the business side of the Air Force, and I'm responsible for trying to end the readiness side. So we're trying to make sure that we have the appropriate readiness so we can give General Raymond and the three and the operations the most the Air Force can give America. Our infrastructure is too big. We know that. I have a litany of testimonials here. I mean, at Keesler Air Force Base, where we train our pilots, we have a 50-plus-year-old drainage system, which just gets rid of the water off the flight line. that can handle large rains. So about 3 times a year, it floods, and we can't conduct pilot training. So last year, we lost 370 sorties because it rained. That facility project is still competing for funds because there's other more critical, facility projects. We avoid $2.9 billion in expenses because of previous precs every year.
Thank you, General Goldfein, General Cooper. Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple of questions I'd like to ask. The first is, to what extent are weapon shortages affecting pre-positioned munition inventories and consequently readiness to address other potential conflicts around the globe?
Thanks, ma'am. So in this budget, what you'll see is that we're actually funding munitions to the capacity that industry can produce. The challenge we face is that while we have the munitions we require for the current fight, it takes us upwards of 4 years to actually replenish a munition that we drop, just based on how we do a budget cycle and the time frame it takes. As we drop more and more munitions, then what happens is, and by the way, as we have more and more allies and partners that join the coalition who are also looking at the same preferred munitions, primarily small diameter bomb, Hellfire, and JDAM are the 3 that we tend to be using in this fight, precision guided, all of them. What we do then to be able to keep the stocks we need for the current fight is we do take the others around the globe down to a certain extent. Now, we have a plan to continue to replenish them, but there's a lag factor because of that 4-year period. So part of that readiness for contingencies in the high-end fight, if you were to have the PACOM commander here or the UCOM commander here, they would probably both tell you that they're not satisfied with their current stock levels that we've had to deplete in order to have what we need for the current fight. In addition, when our allies and partners come to us and say, listen, we're part of this coalition and we need your support with munitions, and oh, by the way, here's what we'd really like to have: Hellfires, JDAMs, and small diameter bomb, that further exacerbates the challenge we have.
Absolutely.
So what we're working to do is to be able to work to project future expenditures based on historical averages. We've been in this for 15 years. We think we can probably project about what we're going to drop 2 to 3 years from now, and then be able to shorten the cycle time to be able to replenish those munitions so we can keep our stocks high.
Thank you. Thank you very much, General. And I guess now is a $64,000 question. If the current operational tempo were to increase, say budget constraints, sequestration, whatever else you have out there, what would be the real effect on the total Air Force and, of course, readiness, is most importantly? Can you, I'm talking like 2020 or whatever the case might be, if you could answer that, General.
Yes, ma'am. It will, as I said before, the one element that we can't control is demand. And demand of the things that we look at to generate and sustain readiness, levers, if you will, it's the demand signal that's actually keeping us from doing the high-end training. If that demand goes up with the capacity that we currently have, if we don't get bigger, if we don't bring these maintainers on, if we don't bring our capacity up, we will be less and less ready over time for the high-end fight. So it goes to the, again, if I can fly this many sorties and that's all that I can generate, and I need this many sorties here to be able to generate full spectrum readiness, and the reality is the nation calls on me to do this, I'm going to have less to do high-end training and I'm going to be less ready.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bordallo, and now go to Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief about this. I do want to go back to one of the last points Ms. Bordallo made, and the munitions, and that's hard for a South Georgia boy to say. We call it ammo. It doesn't matter what size it is; it's ammo. But our private sector partners that provide a lot of those things for us, when we're not able to give them consistency in their production, that creates a tremendous amount of turmoil on them, and in many cases, we've lost our partners in the private sector and have ended up with sole source, or in some cases, having to go to other countries that quite honestly aren't friendly with us to do certain things. But I do want to encourage you to do one thing. The people on the committee, the Armed Services Committee, I think will support you regardless of what party they're in. If you look, we've historically been able to work together on these issues. But I would ask that you expand and meet with members that are not on the Armed Services Committee. This patch, if you will, that is going to temporarily stop the reduction in readiness from 50% on down, this is a patch, and that's all it is. And I think that members who are not on the Armed Services Committee or who are not on Armed Services Appropriations probably don't understand the current situation, and some of them are very anxious to cut spending no matter where those cuts come from. And my concern is not with any of the members here or of this committee. My concern is with members who have not had the opportunity to listen to people who we respect as much as we respect the three of you. So I would encourage you to speak with all of the members as well, and take somebody from their state.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Scott. I think that completes our questioning. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. I want to thank not only you, but all your colleagues there, our airmen that have joined us today. A great opportunity to see how the process works. We appreciate your perspective. It's very important as we develop the policy this year in National Defense Authorization Act to make sure that we get it right, restore as much readiness as we can within this particular window. So, gentlemen, thanks again for your service. We appreciate the sacrifice, too, of your families, and our subcommittee is now hereby adjourned.